everyone, my name is Allie and welcome to my channel. And today I actually kind of need to do a joint wrap up. I need to do a wrap up for May and a wrap up for June. I ended up not doing a wrap up for May because I felt like I didn't really read enough and I just did not have a very good reading month in May. And I feel like that was kind of around like the beginning of my reading slump, like my true reading slump. So I just decided not to do one, and it kind of lined up pretty well with the fact that I was like going to Massachusetts and Rhode Island. So it just kind of worked out that way. And now it is the beginning of July and I need to do my June wrap up. So we kind of have a lot of ground to cover, and I want to do this in like the most casual, chill way. Just kind of like we're having a discussion one-on-one together as friends. Which, I mean, I feel like all of my wrap ups are kind of like that, but I do want to just kind of keep this one even more casual than normal. So I'm going on to Goodreads and I am going to actually find the books that I read in May. And I believe I only read 2 books in the month of May, and the first one was Woman Eating by Claire Coda. I ended up not rating this book, and honestly at this point I don't really remember a lot about it, so I'm not even gonna pretend like I remember like the finer details of this book. But I also kind of think that that speaks to the level of enjoyment that I had while reading it. I don't want to say that this book began my reading slump, but caused it, but it kind of did, because the book that I had read before this one was Evil Eye, which I actually have right here, and it's one of my favorite books of the year, and I absolutely loved it. Like, I had a really great reading month in April. I read so many incredible books. And then I got to Woman Eating and I ended up really being disappointed by it. This is kind of like a vampire-inspired literary fiction novel. Like a coming-of-age literary fiction adult novel, but there are vampires, or at least the main character is a vampire. I believe that in this book, she's unsure of if there are other vampires out there. I can't remember. But I just remember feeling like this book never really went to the places where I was expecting it to go or where I wanted it to go. And that's not necessarily the book's fault per se, but like I think that because it's literary fiction and it's kind of in the same vein as like My Year of Rest and Relaxation, but with vampires, I just kind of thought that it would be a little bit more weird. It would kind of go deeper into like the weirdness and like kind of the grossness of not only like being a vampire but also a lot of like the apathy and listlessness of being in your 20s. And she's also an artist, and it kind of follows her throughout the art scene while being a vampire, but like it never really grabbed me. It never really made me feel any type of way about the main character. And because the main character was so lacking, there wasn't really a lot going on plot-wise either, and there wasn't really anything for me to hold on to. So unfortunately I did not like Woman Eating. I wouldn't recommend it. I do have a book that is kind of in like that similar sort of like horror meets literary fiction, and that book is A Certain Hunger, and I definitely want to read that, especially before the fall time, because I have a feeling I'm gonna like it. I know a lot of people who I trust and who I would take recommendations from who did like that book, so fingers crossed. But yeah, Woman Eating, not one that I would personally recommend as somebody who is a fan of literary fiction. And now I remember that because I was going through that slump and I was having a hard time finishing that other book, I did end up going to my roots and went with People We Meet on Vacation, and I ended up rereading this book in the month of May. So this is my original copy that I read from when I first read this book a few years ago, and I actually decided to listen to it on audiobook this time, and I absolutely loved it. Like, I loved it even more on audiobook, which is very strange, especially with Emily Henry. I tend to like her books more physically than I do as audiobooks, but this one really reminded me of why I love her books so much. It was so much fun. I love Poppy and Alex so much. I love that this book is very much like a true friends to lovers narrative. I love that it is kind of set in Palm Springs. I love going to Palm Springs. I really wish I was going this year. I thought I was, but change of plans. But I loved getting to read this book and feeling like I was right back in there in Palm Springs. It was so much fun. But yeah, definitely, I feel like this book is usually towards the bottom of my ranking for Emily Henry books, but I feel like it kind of bumped itself up a spot, and now Book Lovers is at the bottom of my ranking, which makes it sound really bad. I do love Book Lovers. I love all of Emily Henry's romance books, but there has to be a book at the bottom, unfortunately. Love this one. Such a good one. I always recommend, if people are wanting to get into Emily Henry, that they start with this one. Very rarely will I say to start with Beach Read, because I feel like a lot of people don't love Beach Read, especially if they read it first. Unless you're like me and really love to cry and are like really super emotional. And if you love Folklore by Taylor Swift, you're gonna love Beach Read. But if you are not that kind of person, you're not like the type of person who likes to read a book and cry, and you're not like really into folklore, if maybe like say Lover is your favorite or Fearless is your favorite, definitely check out People We Meet on Vacation. It is so good. Okay, so those were the only 2 books that I read in the month of May. As you can see, not a great reading month. I had 1 book that was super disappointing, and then I just reread a favorite of mine. But I think that that definitely did help, because I had a much better reading month in June, and so I ended up reading this book on the plane, both to and from Massachusetts, and that is In 5 Years by Rebecca Searle. I loved this book so much. Like I said with Beach Read, this is a book for you if you like to cry, if you like folklore, if you like nostalgia and pining and stuff like that. Like, this is your book. Pick it up. It's so good. It's just really hard to explain, because it does kind of have a really interesting narrative. Basically, it's about this woman, and she's in her 20s, she's living in New York, she's having this great life, she's in this relationship with a man that she loves, and she ends up having this like really vivid dream about another man, and the dream is set 5 years in the future. She's happy with this guy, she has this whole other life, and things just went way differently than she ever expected them to. And she wakes up and she kind of like brushes it off. Like, it makes her feel weird, but she's like, you know, I'm in this relationship with this guy and I really love him and things are going great. I'm not really gonna bring it up. I'm not gonna worry about it. And then 5 years later, she ends up meeting the guy that she had had that dream about, and he ends up being the boyfriend to her best friend. And that really complicates things for basically everybody involved, but mostly her, because she's really the only one that knows that this is going on, but she's really acting weird around everybody. I feel like that's all I really want to tell you, because I don't want to like spoil it. It's so good. It's so beautifully written. It's set in New York, so if you're looking for a book like that, I highly recommend it. It was just beautiful. Like, I cried so many times on the plane, and I couldn't even be that embarrassed, because this book was so good. The next book that I ended up reading and absolutely loving was You Again by Kate Goldbeck, and I also gave this book a 5 out of 5 stars. Truly, if you are a Nora Ephron fan, if you love When Harry Met Sally, this is the book for you. It is so good, and it also kind of reminded me a little bit of Ali Hazelwood. So if you also like Ali Hazelwood, I love her books so much. This might also be a really great book for you. It was so funny. The main character was really quirky, but like in the best way possible. She's also queer. I can't remember exactly what her label is or like what she identifies as, but I know that she's queer. And this is just a really great book that is kind of set over the course of a few years. And these 2 people meet, and they don't really get along at first. Like, they don't really get off on the best foot, if we're gonna say that. But then they keep kind of meeting each other throughout the years, and their lives slowly start to get more and more intertwined, and they kind of come to like a little bit of a friendship. And you know, it very loosely follows like the When Harry Met Sally plot. So if you've seen that movie, you can kind of figure out what happens. But yeah, it was really good. I really liked it, and highly recommend if you're looking for like a really fun and very engaging rom-com. Like, this is very much a rom-com. I hate when people recommend books as rom-coms, and yeah, they're romantic, but they're not funny. This book is definitely funny. And around this point in the month, I kind of remembered that it was Pride Month, and I was like, you know what, you should probably pick up a few queer books. Thankfully, I'd already picked up You Again and absolutely loved it, and that book is queer, so I was like, okay, let's keep this ball rolling. And I ended up picking up Leading Lady by Betty Hawkins, and this cover is very deceiving, but I kind of knew that it would be. I had this feeling. I was like, I don't think that this book is gonna be the kind of book that it's trying to portray itself as, but whatever. I mean, the cover of the book is very like beach read-y, fluffy, kind of like silly romance book, if you will. And I was like, okay, you know, this book is about two people that are in the film industry. One of them is a director and the other is an actress, and I believe that it's set in the 80s or 90s, I can't remember. And I was like, you know what, that doesn't really fit the vibe of the book cover. I was just very thrown off by that, but I just thought I would mention that because I just thought it was weird. But the book did definitely end up being really fluffy and very light-hearted. It just felt like it lacked a lot of substance for me personally. It was a good distraction, but I didn't really have any sort of like emotional reaction to it. The characters were fine, the plot was fine. It was a distraction. It got me another book on my reading goals, so whatever. The next book is one that I absolutely loved, and that was Singled Out: The True Story of Glenn Burke by Andrew Moranis. And this is a nonfiction, kind of like biography, I guess, about the first openly gay baseball player, Glenn Burke. And he is also the one that invented and popularized the high five, which I think is really interesting and really cool. And this was a great book. Even if you're not really into baseball, I think that this is a great insight into baseball, but also into the way that queer athletes are treated, especially pro athletes. I will say this book is definitely very sad and does not have like the happiest of endings, but that's to be unfortunately really expected for queer people in that day and age, especially, you know, with the 80s and 90s and the AIDS epidemic. It was definitely a hard book to read. And even talking about it makes me a little emotional, but it was a really good book, and I think that a lot of people should read it. I think that people who are queer or into baseball or whatever should definitely go ahead and pick it up. It was so good. The next book that I read and also really enjoyed was We Do What We Do in the Dark by Michelle Hart. And this book is a literary fiction novel, and it is about I think she's like 19 at the beginning of this book, and she's a college student at an unnamed university on Long Island, but in my mind it's LIU. In my mind it's Long Island University because that's the one that I know and I've been there, so I can kind of picture it. But she's a student there, and she ends up getting into this affair with one of the professors, and not one of her professors. She's never taken her class, but one of the professors on campus. And because it's a literary fiction, there's not like a whole lot of plot here. It's really just like about the circumstances and about this main character, and really deep diving into her past and into her childhood, and kind of the way that she struggled with her sexuality, and the way that like she has kind of always known that she is romantically interested in women, but she's never really put a label to it. She's never really like said it out loud to anybody. And really it's just kind of about her coming to terms with the fact that like she is a queer person and she does have these feelings, and she doesn't really want to keep them hidden any longer. And I think that that's a really interesting way to kind of like portray that as through an affair, because usually an affair is like very hush-hush, very quiet, like you keep it a secret. And through this affair and looking back on her past and kind of like having all of these experiences, she learns to kind of come to terms with her sexuality and stuff like that. So I really enjoyed this book. I thought it was really beautifully written. I loved the main character. I thought that, you know, I thought that her characterization was really, really well done. I loved getting to see the way that she has kind of like reacted and dealt with a lot of the things that's happened to her in her past. I really enjoyed it, and I love that it was set on Long Island because I don't really read a lot of books that are set there, and I've been there a few times now, so I can kind of like picture it better in my mind now that I've been there. The second to last book that I finished in the month of June was Black Swans by Eve Babbitt, and I have been wanting to get into Eve Babbitt for quite a while. She did pass away, I believe, 2 or 3 years ago, and that was really around the time when I had first kind of like discovered her books and heard about her in the first place. And so I ended up buying 2 of her books. I bought Black Swans and I also bought Sex and Rage, which I'm currently reading. But I ended up bringing this book to the beach with me one day, and I got like 70 pages into it in one sitting, and I was like, okay, I might really, really enjoy this book, and Eve Babbitt might become one of my new favorite authors. And I think that, you know, finishing this book and going on to Sex and Rage, I can pretty confidently say that she is one of my new favorite authors. This was an incredible collection of stories that really focus on Los Angeles in the 1980s to 1990s. They are fictional stories, but I have a feeling that there are a lot of truths in them, that there is some sort of basis in reality, because they really read very autobiographical, which I like about this collection of stories. And as a Californian, but not as somebody who, like, I didn't grow up in LA, I wasn't born in LA, whatever, I thought it was really intriguing to kind of see this perspective on LA in comparison to other perspectives that I've seen before. And I really, really want to find more books that kind of do this sort of thing, where they kind of use their own perspective on LA to like write a novel or stories or whatever, because I think that that's so intriguing. And I feel like I really only got a little slice of Los Angeles in this book, and I want to know more. I want to see more. So I really enjoyed this. It was very, very engaging, very like, I felt so transported back in time, and I really, really loved it. I mean, I think that there was only one story that like really didn't do it for me and felt a little bit disjointed narrative wise, but overall, like, I liked every single story in here. They were all just so immersive and so thoughtful and just very tangible in a way. Like, I don't know how else to explain it. Like, it really felt like you were there living it in LA in the 80s, in the 90s, and, you know, just really getting to experience it through the narrator's eyes. It was really, really great. And the very last book that I read in the month of June was Rosewater by Liv Little. And this is one that I've kind of gone back and forth about how I want to rate it, or even if I do want to rate it. I'm stuck between like a 3 or 4 star rating. I really don't know. But this book is queer literary fiction, and it was kind of pitched as for fans of Luster by Raven Leilani, which I am a huge fan of. One of my favorite books of all time. I absolutely love it. So I was kind of like, okay, I'm gonna pick up Rosewater. I'm gonna see what it's all about, see if I really enjoy it. And it was definitely a very engaging book, and I had a hard time putting it down, but it was almost kind of like a little bit of a train wreck, but I also feel like that's a little too harsh to say. Like, it wasn't bad. I really liked the writing and I liked the main character, but I also felt like this book was extremely melodramatic, which is something that I've felt like I've run into a lot with British literature. That might be a British thing, where like I feel like a lot of times in these books that I read by British authors, whether it's this one or Adelaide, which I mean, I really liked Adelaide, and I really liked Mame, which I read both of those. Was that last year I read those? I can't remember, but it was a while ago. And I did really enjoy those books, but all 3 of those ones are written by British authors, and they're all very melodramatic. Like, they're all very much like one bad thing happens after the other, and I don't hate that, but it also kind of feels like at a point, like, really, like, come on, really, are we really, did that really happen? Like, seriously. It just felt like, okay, now this person gets their heart broken, and now they're losing their job, and now they're getting into a car accident, and now this is happening, and now this is happening, and now their dad is having an affair, and now, like, I'm like, how is all of this happening to one person in one book? I think that that's just like a difference between British literature and American literature. So I can kind of see the comparison to Luster, but I also feel like Luster isn't quite so melodramatic. I could be wrong. Maybe that's just like my incorrect perspective, but I have that feeling. But I did enjoy it at the end of the day, and I liked the representation of like these two best friends and their sort of like pseudo romance a little bit. I did feel like the ending was a little abrupt, but that's just my taste. I kind of like to sit in the emotions for a little bit longer than that, but it was fine. I still don't know how I want to rate it, but I did read it and I think I enjoyed it. I think I did. But yeah, those were all of the books that I read in the months of May and June. I definitely had a really interesting 2 months of reading. Like, May was very desolate, very not much happening there. But then I feel like I really picked myself back up in June and read some books that I really enjoyed and some books that definitely made me think. I also blame Bridgerton for rotting my brain for like a month from May to June. And I think that really hindered me in my reading schedule and routine and stuff like that. And now that that's over, kind of, like, I'm still like so obsessed with Bridgerton, huge Bridgerton brain rot. I'm reading so many fanfics every week. But still, I feel like because the season itself is over, I feel a little bit more free to kind of like get back into reading and picking up books and stuff like that. I definitely had a really great reading month, at least in June, and hopefully July will be just as great. I mean, like I said, I'm reading Sex and Rage by Eve Babbitt's, which I brought with me yesterday and I didn't even get to pick up. I'm only 28, 29 pages into this book, but I'm really, really loving it. So I feel like that's everything I have to say. I hope you guys enjoyed this joint wrap up, and let me know down below in the comments what you were reading in the months of May and June, and maybe what you plan to read in July. And if you enjoyed this video, go ahead and give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. Also go ahead and follow me on Instagram, Twitter, Goodreads, Storygraph, TikTok. All the links are down below, and I will see you all in my next video. Bye!